She thought her husband had left her with nothing. No money, no security, just grief. But when she followed a map he left behind and opened a hidden door deep in the mountains, what she discovered was 25 years of love buried in silence, and it would change her life forever. Mary Thornton had never imagined silence could feel this loud. It wasn't just the absence of Thomas's voice. It was the absence of everything that made a house feel alive. The quiet pressed against her ears when she woke up in the morning, lingered in the hallway as she walked past rooms that still carried his presence, and settled heavily in her chest at night when she reached across the bed and found nothing but cold sheets. After 40 years of marriage, you don't just lose a person. You lose a rhythm, a routine, a shared language built from countless small moments that no one else in the world could understand. 3 weeks had passed since Thomas's funeral, but time hadn't softened anything. If anything, it had made everything sharper. The sympathy calls had slowed, the casseroles had stopped arriving, and the world had quietly moved on, leaving Mary behind in a life that no longer made sense. She moved through her days like someone following instructions she didn't fully understand. Wake up, make tea, sit by the window, try to read, fail to focus, wander from room to room, remembering. Thomas had been everywhere in this house, not in a haunting way, but in the gentle, ordinary traces of a life well lived. His gardening gloves still sat by the back door, dusted with dried soil. His favorite mug, the one with the faded blue pattern, remained in the cupboard exactly where he always left it. Even the air felt like him, faintly carrying that familiar scent of earth and greenery that had clung to him after long days working outdoors. Mary had spent the first 2 weeks avoiding his things. It felt like a betrayal to touch them, like she was erasing him piece by piece. But reality had a way of forcing decisions. Bills still needed to be paid. The future, no matter how uncertain, was still coming. And so, on a quiet morning filled with more courage than she thought she had left, she opened the closet. His clothes hung there exactly as he'd left them, shirts neatly pressed, jackets lined up with quiet precision, shoes placed carefully below. For a moment she simply stood there, her hand resting on the doorframe, her heart tightening at the sight. It was as if he might walk in at any second, ask her what she was doing, smile that calm, reassuring smile of his. But he didn't. With trembling hands she reached for the first shirt. The fabric felt familiar beneath her fingers, soft from years of wear. She lifted it slightly, bringing it closer without thinking, and the faint scent of him lingered there, soil, soap, and something uniquely Thomas. Her throat tightened, and for a second she almost put it back. But she didn't. She couldn't live frozen in this moment forever. Piece by piece, she began sorting through his belongings. Some items she set aside for donation, others she folded carefully, unsure of what she would do with them but unable to let them go just yet. It was slow, emotionally exhausting work, each item carrying a memory, a fragment of a life that had ended too soon. By the time she finished the closet, the room felt different. Not emptier, exactly, but changed, as if a chapter had been quietly closed without her permission. The real shock came later that week, sitting across from a lawyer in a small, overly tidy office that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Mary had gone in expecting clarity, maybe even reassurance. She had always believed that Thomas, steady and responsible as he was, must have had some kind of plan. Not wealth necessarily, but something. A safety net, a cushion, a sign that he had thought about her future. The lawyer spoke gently, his tone careful, almost apologetic. He explained the details of the will, the assets, the accounts. Mary listened, at first nodding, waiting for the part that would make everything okay. It never came. There was the house paid off, thankfully, and a small amount of money in their checking account. Just a few $1,000s, that was all. Mary blinked, certain she had misunderstood. She asked him to repeat it, her voice quiet but firm. Surely there had to be something else. Savings, investments, anything. But there was. Each word felt heavier than the last as the reality settled in. 40 years of work, Decades of effort, of long days and careful budgeting, and this was all that remained. No retirement cushion from Thomas, no hidden funds, nothing that could guarantee stability in the years ahead. A strange mix of emotions rose inside her, clashing and colliding in ways she couldn't immediately process. Grief was still there, deep and raw, but now it was joined by something sharper: confusion, fear, and underneath it all, a growing sense of something she didn't want to name. Anger. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was quiet, almost reluctant, like a feeling she didn't believe she had the right to experience. But it was there, creeping in at the edges of her thoughts. How could he leave her like this? The question echoed in her mind as she drove home, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. She thought about all the years they had spent being careful with money, skipping vacations, choosing practicality over luxury. She had trusted that those sacrifices meant something, that there was a reason behind them. Now it felt like there was. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not physically, but in the way it felt. It no longer felt like a place of shared security. It felt uncertain, fragile, like something that could slip away if she wasn't careful. Inside, the silence greeted her again, but this time it felt colder. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, replaying the lawyer's words over and over in her mind. Thomas had always been dependable, thoughtful, the kind of man who fixed things before they broke, who planned ahead, who made sure she was okay. So how could this be his plan? The question hurt more than she expected. It felt like a crack in the foundation of everything they had built together. Not enough to erase the love they shared, but enough to make her question things she had never questioned before. Had he been careless? Had he assumed things would somehow work out? Or had there been something he hadn't told her? The thought unsettled her. Mary had always believed their marriage was built on honesty. They weren't perfect, no couple is, but they had always been open with each other. Or at least, that's what she had believed. Now, sitting alone in the quiet kitchen, she wasn't so sure anymore. The grief didn't disappear. It was still there, woven into every breath, every memory, every moment of her day. But now it was tangled with uncertainty, with questions that had no answers, with a sense that something about the life she thought she understood wasn't as simple as it seemed. And for the first time since Thomas had passed, Mary felt something she hadn't expected to feel toward the man she loved for 40 years. The envelope didn't look important at first. It slipped from the top shelf of the closet as Mary reached for one of Thomas's old jackets, landing softly on the carpet near her feet. For a moment, she didn't even notice it. Her mind was still heavy with the quiet exhaustion that had become her constant companion, the kind that didn't come from physical effort, but from carrying too many emotions at once. When she finally glanced down, something about it made her pause. It wasn't just an ordinary envelope. The paper had yellowed with age, its edges slightly worn, as if it had been handled many times before being carefully put away. There was a seal on the back, wax cracked but still holding, and on the front, written in Thomas's familiar, steady handwriting, were words that made her breath catch. For Mary, when the sun seems like it will never shine again. Her hands froze in midair. For a second, she just stared at it, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. There was something deliberate about it, something intentional that didn't feel like the ordinary documents she had been sorting through. This wasn't paperwork. It wasn't a bill or a receipt or anything practical. It was personal. Slowly, she bent down and picked it up, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface as if it might disappear if she touched it too firmly. The paper felt fragile but real, solid in a way that grounded her in the moment. She turned it over in her hands, studying the seal, tracing the edges of Thomas's handwriting. A strange mix of emotions stirred inside her: curiosity, hesitation, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Part of her wanted to open it immediately, to find out what he had left behind in these carefully chosen words, but another part of her held back, afraid of what it might contain. She hadn't been ready for anything unexpected. She had been trying to make sense of a future that already felt uncertain, trying to accept the idea that Thomas had left her with so little. This envelope, sitting quietly in her hands, suggested something else entirely. Mary sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping slightly beneath her weight. The room felt still, almost as if it were waiting with her. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and carefully broke the wax seal. Inside, there was a single folded sheet of paper. A small iron key slipped out as she opened it, landing softly in her lap. It was heavier than she expected, old-fashioned, the kind of key that belonged to something solid and long-standing. Something important. Along with it was a hand-drawn map, the lines slightly uneven but clearly marked, showing a route that led away from town and into the mountains. Her confusion deepened. None of this made sense yet. With slightly trembling hands, she unfolded the letter and began to read. The moment she saw the first line, her chest tightened. It was Thomas's voice on the page, calm, thoughtful, unmistakably him. Every word felt deliberate, as though he had chosen them with care, knowing exactly when and how she would find them. As she read, the room around her seemed to fade. The quiet of the house, the weight of the past few weeks, even her own thoughts, all of it softened as she focused on what he had written. He spoke to her directly, acknowledging her grief, even her anger, as if he knew exactly what she would be feeling. He apologized, not in a vague or distant way, but in a way that felt deeply personal. He knew she would question things. He knew she might feel hurt, confused by what he had left behind. And then, gently but firmly, he asked her to trust him. That word lingered in her mind long after she read it. Trust. It wasn't a new concept in their marriage. Trust had been the foundation of everything they built together. But now, after what she had learned about their financial situation, it felt complicated, fragile, something she wasn't sure she could give so easily anymore. And yet, as she continued reading, something began to shift. He told her about a place he had spent years working on, years she hadn't fully understood at the time. He mentioned the weekends he had been away, the quiet projects he had always described in vague terms. He admitted that he had kept this from her, not out of deception, but because he believed she wouldn't understand. Mary's brow furrowed slightly as she read that part again. A small flicker of irritation stirred within her. After 40 years, how could he think she wouldn't understand something important enough to keep hidden for so long? But the feeling didn't fully take hold. It was softened by the tone of his words, by the way he explained himself, not defensive but almost hopeful, as if he believed that eventually she would see things the way he did. Her eyes moved to the map again, resting on the small X marked at the end of a winding route through unfamiliar terrain. Our sanctuary, he had written. Sanctuary. The word felt out of place in her current reality. Nothing about the past few weeks had felt safe or comforting. Everything had been uncertain, unsettled. And yet here he was, offering her something different, something he had created without her knowing. When she finished reading, she didn't move right away. The letter rested in her lap, the key beside it, the map partially unfolded across the bed. Her mind struggled to catch up with what she had just learned. Thomas had been working on something for years, not just casually, not just as a hobby, but with intention, with purpose. Enough purpose to keep it hidden, to plan for a moment like this. The idea felt both incredible and unsettling. Why hadn't he told her? The question rose again, but this time it didn't carry the same sharp edge of anger. It was quieter now, more reflective, more curious than accusatory. She thought back to all those weekends he had mentioned working on a project. At the time, she had accepted it without much thought. It had been easy to assume it was something simple, something routine. She had trusted him after all. Now those memories felt different, reframed, each one carrying a weight she hadn't recognized before. Mary reached for the key, turning it slowly in her fingers. It felt real, tangible proof that whatever Thomas had written wasn't just words. There was something waiting for her, something he had prepared. A part of her resisted the idea. It would have been easier to dismiss it, to set the envelope aside and return to the familiar rhythm of grief and routine, to stay in the world she understood, even if it was painful. But another part of her, the part that had loved Thomas deeply, the part that still believed in him despite everything, couldn't ignore it. He had asked her to trust him. And despite her doubts, despite her confusion, she realized she wanted to. The decision didn't come all at once. It wasn't a sudden moment of clarity or certainty. It was quieter than that. A gradual shift, like something settling into place. She folded the letter carefully, placing it back into the envelope along with the map. The key she kept in her hand for a moment longer, feeling its weight, its presence. Then she stood. The house still felt quiet, still carried the absence she had been living with. But now there was something else there too. Something new. Not quite hope, not yet, but a direction, a possibility. For the first time since Thomas had passed, Mary felt a pull towards something beyond her grief. Something he had left behind not just as a memory, but as an invitation. And as she looked at the map one more time, tracing the path that led into the mountains, she realized that whatever waited at the end of that journey, whatever truth Thomas had hidden there for all those years, she was going to find it. The road grew narrower the deeper Mary drove into the mountains, as if the world itself was slowly closing in around her. What had started as a familiar highway turned into a winding two-lane road, then a cracked stretch of asphalt, and eventually nothing more than a dirt path that looked like it hadn't been properly maintained in years. Each turn felt like a step further away from everything she knew, her home, her routine, the life she had built with Thomas. At first she followed the map with cautious focus, double-checking each landmark Thomas had sketched in his careful handwriting. A split oak tree, a shallow creek crossing, an old stone wall that leaned as if it had grown tired of standing upright. Each marker matched just as he had drawn it. That alone unsettled her. This wasn't something imagined or exaggerated. It was real. But as the journey went on, something inside her began to shift again. The initial curiosity she had felt when reading the letter slowly gave way to something heavier. Doubt crept in, quiet at first, then louder with every bump in the road. The further she drove, the more isolated the landscape became. Tall trees pressed in on either side, their branches stretching overhead, filtering the sunlight into thin, uneven streaks that flickered across her windshield. "What were you thinking, Thomas?" she muttered under her breath, her fingers tightening slightly around the steering wheel. The question lingered, unanswered. She thought about the lawyer's office, about the numbers that hadn't added up, about the reality she was now facing. And with each mile, it became harder to ignore the possibility that whatever she was about to find might not be worth it at all. The car jolted slightly as it rolled over a patch of uneven ground, and Mary winced, glancing briefly at the dashboard as if the vehicle itself might protest. This wasn't the kind of road her small sedan was meant for. She slowed down, carefully navigating around rocks and shallow dips, her focus divided between driving and the growing storm of thoughts in her mind. All those weekends. The memories surfaced unexpectedly. Thomas had always said he was working on something, a project. Nothing elaborate, nothing detailed. Just enough explanation to satisfy a casual question, but never enough to invite deeper curiosity. At the time, she hadn't questioned it. Why would she? They had trusted each other. They had built a life on that trust. Now, sitting alone in a car heading toward a place she had never heard of, following a map she didn't understand, that trust felt complicated. Had he been hiding something all along? The thought made her chest tighten. Mary shook her head slightly, trying to push it away, but it lingered. Not as a sharp accusation, but as a quiet uncertainty that refused to disappear. The trees began to thin as the road curved one last time, opening into a small clearing. Mary slowed the car to a stop, her eyes scanning the area instinctively, searching for something, anything, that resembled what she had imagined. A house, a cabin, a structure. There was nothing. For a moment she just sat there, the engine idling softly, the silence outside pressing in around her. She reached for the map again, unfolding it carefully and comparing it to what she saw in front of her. This was the place, it had to be. The landmarks matched, the path led here. And yet, her gaze shifted toward the far end of the clearing, where something unusual caught her attention. At first, it looked like nothing more than a dense cluster of vegetation, a mound of green rising unevenly from the ground. But the more she looked, the more something about it felt off. It wasn't entirely natural. Mary stepped out of the car slowly, the door closing behind her with a soft, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of earth and leaves, untouched and still. She walked forward cautiously, her shoes brushing against tall grass that reached almost to her knees. Each step felt uncertain, as if she were approaching something she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. As she got closer, the shape of the mound became clearer. It wasn't just vegetation. There were lines beneath it, straight edges that didn't belong in nature. Corners, angles, the faint outline of something man-made, buried beneath layers of vines, leaves, and tangled growth. Her heart sank. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. It was a cabin, or at least it had been once. Now it looked like something forgotten, abandoned, consumed by time and nature without resistance. Thick vines wrapped around every visible surface, climbing over what must have been the roof, cascading down the sides like a curtain that had never been pulled back. Other plants had joined them, roses with sharp thorns, twisting ivy, clusters of wild growth that seemed to have taken root wherever they could. The structure beneath was barely visible. Mary stopped a few steps away, her arms falling loosely at her sides, her shoulders heavy with the weight of realization. This was it. This was what Thomas had left her. Not a sanctuary, not something valuable or meaningful, just this. A ruin. The disappointment hit her slowly at first, then all at once. It wasn't just about the cabin itself. It was about everything it represented. The time he had spent here, the effort, the secrecy, all of it leading to this moment. And this was the result. A hollow, almost bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it, though there was no humor in it. "This is what you were doing," she said aloud, her voice breaking slightly as it echoed into the empty clearing. "All those weekends, all those years." The words trailed off unfinished. Anger stirred again, stronger this time. Not explosive, but sharp enough to cut through the lingering grief. It wasn't just that he had kept a secret. It was that the secret didn't seem to make sense. They had struggled. She remembered the tight months, the careful budgeting, the small sacrifices they had made without complaint because they believed they were building something together. And all that time, he had been here. Mary felt her chest tighten, her breathing uneven as emotions collided within her. Grief, confusion, frustration, and something that felt dangerously close to betrayal. She turned her gaze back to the cabin, studying it more closely now, as if searching for something she had missed. But there was nothing to soften the reality in front of her. No sign of maintenance. No indication that this place had been cared for. Just layers upon layers of overgrowth, as if nature had claimed it completely. "What was the point?" she whispered, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the stillness. The question lingered, unanswered. For a moment she considered leaving. The thought came quickly, almost instinctively. She had seen enough. Whatever Thomas had intended, whatever he had hoped she would find here, it clearly wasn't what she had imagined. She could get back in the car, drive home, and close this chapter. Pretend this had never happened. Hold on to the version of Thomas she understood, rather than this confusing, incomplete picture that only raised more questions. But her feet didn't move. Something held her there. Maybe it was the letter. Maybe it was the way he had asked her to trust him. Or maybe it was simply the fact that she had come this far and turning back now felt unfinished. Mary took a slow breath, her eyes lingering on the barely visible outline of what must have once been a door. Even if this place was nothing more than a mistake, she needed to know. And as she stepped forward, pushing through the first layer of tangled vines, her hands brushing against leaves and thorns, she felt a quiet shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but a fragile determination to uncover the truth hidden beneath the surface. Because somewhere beneath the disappointment, beneath the confusion, beneath the overwhelming sense that this was all wrong, there was still a part of her that believed Thomas hadn't brought her here for no reason. The door resisted at first, as if it had forgotten how to open. Mary leaned her weight against it, her hand tightening around the cold iron handle while her shoulder pressed forward with more force than she thought she had left. For a brief second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan of wood and hinges that had been still for far too long, it gave way. The moment it opened, everything changed. A soft cascade fell from above, brushing against her shoulders, her arms, her face. At first, she didn't understand what it was. Then she looked down and saw them, petals. Dozens of them. No, hundreds, pale, delicate, almost glowing in the dim light. They drifted down around her like a quiet snowfall, collecting at her feet, caught in her hair, clinging to her clothes. And then the scent reached her. It wasn't gradual, it wasn't subtle. It hit her all at once, filling her lungs before she could even react. Sweet, intense, layered in a way that felt almost impossible to describe. It was floral, yes, but far deeper than anything she had ever smelled before. There was jasmine in it, rich and intoxicating. There was rose, but fuller, more complex, as if every version of a rose she had ever known had been combined into something entirely new. And beneath it all, something green, alive, almost electric. Mary staggered slightly, her hand instinctively moving to her chest as if to steady herself. The sensation was overwhelming, not just physically, but emotionally. The scent didn't just exist in the air. It reached into her, pulled at something deep inside her memory, something tied to Thomas in a way she couldn't immediately explain. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of it. Tears came before she could stop them. Not from sadness, not exactly, but from the sudden, undeniable recognition that this place, whatever it was, had nothing to do with abandonment, nothing to do with neglect. This was intentional. The petals continued to fall, slower now, as if the initial release had passed. They gathered at the threshold, forming a soft layer that cushioned her steps as she moved forward. Her foot crossed into the cabin almost without her realizing it, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. Inside, it was dark. Not the kind of darkness that felt empty or lifeless, but a quiet, enclosed stillness that held its own kind of presence. Mary reached into her pocket with unsteady hands and pulled out her phone, switching on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dimness, revealing the space piece by piece. She stopped. The contrast was immediate and almost disorienting. Outside, everything had seemed chaotic, overgrown, wild, consumed by nature in a way that felt uncontrolled. But inside was something entirely different. The room was clean, not recently cleaned but maintained, preserved. The wooden floor beneath her feet was smooth and solid, aged but intact. The walls, built from thick logs, stood firm and carefully fitted, their surfaces showing signs of time but not decay. Nothing here felt abandoned. Mary took another step forward, her gaze moving slowly across the room as the light followed her movements. A table stood near the center, sturdy and well-used. Shelves lined one side of the wall, filled with objects she couldn't yet fully make out. A stone fireplace occupied the far end, its structure simple but solid, as if it had been built to last. Her breath slowed slightly, though her heart still beat faster than usual. This didn't match what she had expected, not at all. She moved further inside, her attention drawn toward the shelves. As the light passed over them, details began to emerge. Glass frames, rows of carefully arranged items, shapes that looked familiar yet not entirely. Flowers, pressed flowers preserved with a level of care that made them look almost untouched by time. Each one was placed precisely, held between glass or mounted on paper, their colors still vibrant, their forms intact. Some were shapes she recognized, roses, jasmine, but even those looked different, fuller, more defined, as if they had been refined somehow. Mary stepped closer, her hand lifting slightly before stopping herself from touching anything. She leaned in, reading the small labels beneath the specimens. Each one had a name, a date, notes written in Thomas's handwriting. Her breath caught again, but this time it was quieter, steadier. These weren't random collections. They were creations. The realization came slowly, unfolding in her mind piece by piece as she moved along the wall. Each specimen carried its own identity, its own record, its own place in something larger. The dates stretched back years, decades. Her husband hadn't just been coming here. He had been working. Mary turned toward the table in the center of the room, drawn by something she couldn't quite see from where she stood. As she approached, the light revealed a stack of journals, thick, worn, their covers softened by time and use. She reached for the top one carefully, lifting it with both hands as if it might fall apart if she wasn't gentle. When she opened it, the pages told the rest of the story. Line after line of notes filled the paper. Observations, experiments, dates, cross-references. It wasn't casual writing. It was precise, methodical, the work of someone who had spent years refining not just a skill but a purpose. Mary turned a page, then another, her eyes moving quickly at first, then slowing as the weight of what she was seeing began to settle. This wasn't a hobby. This was a life's work. Her chest tightened again, but the feeling had changed. The confusion was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, something deeper, heavier, but also clearer. She sank into the nearest chair without fully deciding to, the journal still open in her hands. The room around her felt different now, no longer unfamiliar, no longer distant. It felt connected, to Thomas, to the years she thought she understood, to the time he had spent away without explanation. Every weekend, every quiet project he had mentioned, every unexplained absence. It had all led here. Mary closed her eyes for a brief moment, the scent from outside still lingering faintly in the air, softer now but still present. When she opened them again, she looked around the cabin with new understanding. Nothing about this place was accidental. Nothing about it was neglected. Everything, every plant, every journal, every carefully preserved specimen, was part of something he had built piece by piece, over years she had never fully seen. The disappointment she had felt outside didn't disappear entirely, but it shifted, reshaped itself into something more complex, less about loss and more about realization. He hadn't left her with nothing. He had left her something she didn't yet fully understand. And as Mary sat there, surrounded by the quiet evidence of his hidden life, her fingers resting lightly on the pages he had written, her mind still catching up with what her heart was beginning to accept, she realized that whatever truth this place held, whatever meaning it carried, it was far greater than anything she had imagined when she first saw the overgrown cabin from the outside. For a long time, Mary didn't move. The journal remained open in her hands, but her eyes were no longer reading the words. They were simply resting there, as if her mind needed a moment to catch up with everything her heart had already begun to understand. The cabin no longer felt unfamiliar. It no longer felt like a hidden place she had stumbled into by accident. It felt intentional now. Every detail, every object, every carefully preserved piece of work carried meaning. not just scientific or practical meaning, but something deeply personal. She slowly closed the journal and placed it back on the table with a level of care that surprised even her. Her hands lingered there for a moment, resting lightly on the worn cover, as if she could still feel the warmth of the man who had spent years writing in it. 25 years. The number echoed quietly in her mind. 25 years of weekends, 25 years of effort, patience, and dedication, all carried out in silence, all done without recognition, without praise, without even the comfort of sharing it with the person it was meant for. For her. Mary stood up slowly and walked toward the window she had opened earlier. The light outside had shifted, softer now, touched with the golden tones of late afternoon. The vines that covered the cabin no longer looked chaotic or suffocating. From this angle, from this understanding, they looked alive in a different way. Intentional. She stepped closer, her hand resting lightly against the wooden frame as she looked out. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, their movement almost rhythmic, as if the entire structure breathed with them. The scent drifted in again, calmer now, less overwhelming but still unmistakably powerful. For the first time since she had arrived, Mary allowed herself to take a full, steady breath. This place wasn't a ruin. It had never been a ruin. The thought settled into her with a quiet certainty. What she had seen earlier, what she had judged so quickly, had only been the surface, a covering, something that hid the truth rather than revealed it. And underneath it all, there was something extraordinary. Mary turned back toward the room, her gaze moving slowly across the shelves, the table, the journals, the preserved flowers. Everything she looked at now carried weight, not just as objects but as proof. Proof of time, proof of effort, proof of love expressed not through words but through years of action. She walked back to the table, her steps more grounded now, more certain. The leather album she had discovered earlier rested where she had left it. For a moment, she hesitated before opening it again, not out of fear this time, but out of respect for what she knew it contained. When she turned the pages, the images felt different now. Before they had been surprising, now they felt understood. Each photograph of a flower was no longer just a creation. It was a memory, a connection, a reflection of something they had lived together, even if she hadn't known how it had been preserved. She paused on one page longer than the others, her fingers tracing lightly along the edge of the photograph. The handwriting beside it was unmistakably his, calm, careful, familiar. He had thought of her in every step. That realization didn't come with a sudden burst of emotion this time. It came quietly, steadily, settling into her like something that had always been true, even if she had only just discovered it. Mary closed the album gently and looked around the cabin once more. The silence no longer felt heavy. It no longer felt empty. It felt full, not in a way that replaced Thomas, but in a way that carried him differently. Not as an absence, but as a presence that had taken another form. She walked slowly toward the door, stepping carefully over the layer of petals that had gathered at the threshold. Outside, the light had softened further, stretching shadows across the clearing. The air felt cooler now, but still carried that unmistakable fragrance that seemed to exist nowhere else in the world. Mary stepped out and turned back to look at the cabin. This time she saw it clearly. Not as something abandoned, not as something wasted, but as something built with intention, shaped over time, protected in a way she hadn't understood before. Her chest tightened slightly, but it wasn't the sharp pain she had felt in the days after his passing. It was something deeper, more complex, a mixture of grief and gratitude, of loss and realization. "You did all this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt small compared to what she now understood. For years she had believed love was found in the visible things, the shared moments, the conversations, the time spent side by side. And those things mattered. They always would. But this was something else. This was love stretched across time. Love expressed in patience, in quiet effort, in sacrifices made without recognition. Love that didn't need to be seen in the moment, because it was meant to be discovered when it was needed most. Mary felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She let it fall, just as she let the understanding settle fully into her. He hadn't failed her. He hadn't left her unprepared. He had simply chosen a different way to protect her. And now, standing in front of everything he had built, she realized that what he had left behind wasn't just something valuable in a practical sense. It was something meaningful, something alive, something that still had the power to grow. Mary took a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly as a new kind of clarity formed within her. The fear she had felt before, the uncertainty about the future, the worry about what would come next, hadn't disappeared completely. But it had changed. It no longer felt like an empty space, waiting to be filled with doubt. It felt like something open, something waiting. She looked at the cabin again, then at the flowers, then at the path she had taken to get here. For the first time, she didn't see it as a one-time journey. She saw it as something that could continue. Not just as a memory, but as a purpose. "I'm not leaving this behind," she said quietly, more to herself than anything else. The decision didn't feel forced. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt natural, like something that had already been made somewhere deep inside her before she had even found the words for it. This place wasn't just his anymore. It was hers too. Not because he had given it to her, but because he had built it with her in mind from the very beginning. Mary took a few steps forward, moving closer to the garden that surrounded the cabin. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against one of the flowers. The petals were soft, almost impossibly so, their color deeper than anything she had seen before. It was real. All of it was real. And for the first time since Thomas had passed, Mary felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Not just acceptance, but direction. She didn't know exactly what she would do next. She didn't have a plan laid out in perfect detail. But she knew this: she wouldn't walk away from what he had created. She would learn it, understand it, protect it, and maybe in time continue it. Because this wasn't just a gift meant to be received. It was something meant to be carried forward. Mary stood there a little longer, surrounded by the quiet movement of the flowers, the fading light of the day, and the presence of a love that had taken shape in ways she had never expected. And in that moment, she understood something simple but powerful. Real love is not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself in obvious ways. Sometimes it works in silence. It grows in the background. It builds something lasting, something meaningful, something that reveals itself only when the time is right. And the moral of this story is that true love is not just about what we say or show in the present, but what we quietly build for the future, even when no one is watching. Because the greatest acts of love are often the ones that take time, patience, and faith to grow into something that can outlast us and continue to give even when we are no longer there to explain it. This story is shared for inspiration and emotional storytelling purposes. While it reflects real-life themes of love, loss, and devotion, some elements may be adapted or dramatized to enhance the narrative experience. The purpose of this video is to inspire hope, reflection, and appreciation for the unseen efforts people make for those they love.